At a bustling airport, amidst the chaos of travelers rushing to catch flights, a shocking incident unfolds that will challenge everything you think you know about justice. Clara Johnson, an elegant black woman with a first-class ticket in hand, is about to experience a moment that will leave you questioning the very fabric of fairness. She stands there, minding her business, waiting for her flight, unaware that her calm presence has caught the eye of Sarah White, a privileged white woman who feels threatened by Clara's mere existence in the same space. With no evidence, no cause, and no reason, Sarah decides that Clara is a problem. She whispers her accusation to the nearest airport staff, a claim with no truth behind it. And just like that, the storm begins to brew. The officers arrive, cold and emotionless, as they approach Clara. They don't ask questions. They don't investigate. Without hesitation, they slap handcuffs on her, treating her like a criminal in front of a crowd that watches but does nothing. The silence in the terminal is deafening. Travelers glance away, pretending not to notice, while Clara stands there, calm, poised, her dignity intact. But inside, the fury is rising. Why is no one stepping in? Why is no one saying anything? The injustice is unfolding right before their eyes. And yet, the crowd remains passive. Clara is being humiliated, stripped of her rights without a single shred of evidence. And all the while, she knows that this isn't just about her. It's about something much bigger. This moment, this wrongful arrest, isn't the end for Clara. It's just the beginning. And the world will soon learn that one woman's courage can spark a fire that no one can put out. Will the truth be silenced? Or will Clara's fight for justice ignite a movement that can no longer be ignored? The story has only just begun, and the journey for justice is about to unfold in a way that no one ever expected. Sarah White's gaze never left Clara. Every step Clara took, every move she made, seemed to fuel Sarah's anger more. It wasn't the way Clara was dressed. She wore an elegant black dress that spoke of refinement, not rebellion. It wasn't her demeanor. She stood tall, poised, an image of calm serenity. No, it wasn't any of that. It was simply the fact that Clara, a black woman, had the audacity to board the same flight, to be seated in the same first-class cabin as Sarah Detain. Sarah's world. A black woman did not belong in a place of privilege, a place of exclusivity. And so, a seed of resentment was planted in Sarah's heart, a seed that grew into a bitter vine of accusation. Sarah couldn't let it go. She couldn't let Clara stand there, equal to her first-class ticket as valid as Sarah's own. "She's acting suspiciously," Sarah muttered under her breath, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby airport staff to hear. It wasn't loud enough to be a direct accusation, but it was enough. Enough to get the attention of the officers who had been stationed nearby, scanning the crowded terminal for any signs of trouble. Sarah's words hung in the air like poison, a quiet but lethal accusation that only needed a spark to set everything in motion. Clara remained unaware of the brewing storm as she casually flipped through her phone, unaware of Sarah's narrowing eyes, unaware of the finger that subtly pointed in her direction. It wasn't until the officers appeared in front of her, their cold stares fixed upon her, that Clara felt the first chill of what was to come. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions," one of the officers said, his voice gruff and commanding. He wasn't polite. He wasn't kind. His tone was devoid of any curiosity or genuine concern. It was as if Clara had already been judged before she'd even had a chance to speak. Clara raised her head slowly, meeting the officer's gaze with calm determination. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was steady, even, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. But beneath her composed exterior, Clara could feel the knot of tension forming in her stomach. She knew this moment had nothing to do with her actions. It had everything to do with the color of her skin. One of the officers glanced over at Sarah White, who stood there, arms folded, her face an unreadable mask. Clara followed the officer's gaze and saw the slight smirk tugging at Sarah's lips. That smug, self-assured expression. Clara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. She didn't let them see her fear. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Clara asked, her voice never wavering. She'd already presented her first-class ticket. She had nothing to hide. But the officers didn't ask to see it again. They didn't question Sarah's motivations. They didn't do anything to verify the truth. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, his tone hardening, "we're going to need you to come with us." It was not a request. It was an order. Clara's eyes flickered to the other passengers who had now gathered in a semicircle around her, most of them looking away, pretending not to notice the growing tension. A few had their phones out, recording the scene, but no one was stepping forward to help. They were all spectators, silent, passive, complicit. Clara stood still, her mind racing, but she didn't let it show. She knew exactly what was happening. She was being targeted, unfairly detained, and for no other reason than the fact that she was black and standing in a space Sarah White didn't think she belonged in. Her hand tightened around her handbag strap, but she didn't let herself react. She couldn't. If she reacted the way they expected her to, angry, defensive, emotional, they would use it against her. She would become the stereotype they had already prepared for her. The angry black woman. The woman out of place. She refused to give them that satisfaction. "I'm not going anywhere without an explanation," Clara said firmly. "If you're detaining me, you'll need to give me a reason. I'm well within my rights." But the officer didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her skin as he yanked her towards him. Clara stumbled, but she didn't fight. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood tall, even as the officers surrounded her. "Let go of me," she demanded, though her voice remained measured, controlled. Her heart was hammering, but she refused to let them see the fear. She wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. But it was too late. The officers, now dragging her through the terminal, didn't hesitate. Clara could hear the murmurs of the crowd behind her, the whispers, the judgment, the collective decision to stand by and do nothing. Her heart sank. No one had the courage to speak up. No one stood in solidarity. They were all too afraid, too comfortable. That as Clara was pushed toward the back of the airport, her mind raced. She had spent years fighting for justice, for equality, for those who had been silenced. Now she was the one being silenced. But she wasn't done yet. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. In that moment, Clara made a vow. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had ever been treated as less than, for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin. This injustice would not go unnoticed, and she wasn't going to let anyone forget her name as Clara was dragged away. Her mind still calm, but her heart beating harder with every step. Something strange began to happen. People started to pull out their phones. At first, it was just a few, a couple of curious onlookers, possibly trying to capture a moment of drama for their social media feeds. But soon it was more than a few. A wave of people, immobilized by their own discomfort, started recording, their screens lighting up in the otherwise dimly lit terminal. Among them was Daniel Carter. a young man in his 20s, who stood there, trembling in disbelief. He had never expected to witness something like this. Not here, not now. He wasn't a professional activist. He wasn't someone who typically sought out the uncomfortable truths of the world. But when he saw what was happening to Clara, something inside him snapped. He knew he had to act, even if it was only through a lens that he fumbled with his phone. His hands shaking as he started to record, the camera capturing Clara's every move. The handcuffs now visible, the officer's cold eyes, the way the crowd seemed to breathe as one, collectively ignoring the scene. The faint clicks of the camera shutter echoed in his ears, but the air was heavy with tension. The contrast between the cold detachment of the police and Clara's composed defiance made Daniel's stomach twist. Clara remained silent, refusing to allow them the satisfaction of a reaction. Her face was an image of quiet dignity, but beneath the calm exterior, a storm raged. The officers didn't care. They shoved her forward, treating her like a criminal, all the while ignoring the few who dared to look. Clara didn't flinch as the cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin. She didn't let the officers see her pain. They wanted to see her break, to see her anger rise. But she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, her eyes locked onto the faces around her. People watched but didn't speak. No one stood up to intervene, not even when the injustice was so obvious. Instead, they pulled out their phones and started recording, as if they were watching a show, an incident they could scroll past later. The crowd's collective gaze was nothing more than a passive, detached response to the brutality unfolding before them. Daniel's hands were clammy, the phone shaking as he tried to keep the camera steady. He could feel the anger building inside of him, and yet, a part of him was unsure. Should he step in? Should he say something? Should he call out the police officers? But he didn't. Not yet. He was paralyzed by the weight of the situation, by the fear of what would happen if he spoke up. It was all happening so fast, and yet it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. Clara was being dragged away, her feet barely touching the ground as the officers led her toward a back hallway, where the public eye could no longer see her. The crowd remained eerily quiet, as though they all feared speaking up would make them targets of the same scrutiny. The only sounds in the terminal were the murmurs of confusion and the quiet click of phones recording. Some passengers seemed embarrassed. Some appeared genuinely concerned, but most simply watched, passive, as if they were witnessing an isolated event that had no relevance to them. They didn't intervene. They didn't speak up. They just watched. Daniel's thoughts raced. Was this what the world had come to? People standing by, recording injustice but refusing to stand up for it? Was this what it meant to be human? To watch someone's dignity be torn apart and do nothing? Suddenly, Clara spoke, her voice cold but resolute. What is happening here? Why am I being treated like this? Her words hung in the air like a challenge. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't begging for mercy. She wasn't crying out for help. She was simply asking a question. The officers didn't answer. They couldn't, because there was no answer. They were acting out of nothing more than their own assumptions, their biases. And the crowd knew it. Daniel could feel the weight of the truth. It pressed on him like a heavy stone in his chest, suffocating him. Clara was being treated as less than human, and no one was doing anything about it. A few people whispered among themselves, but no one moved to stop the officers. No one spoke out. It was as if the crowd had become numb to the world around them, a group of strangers bound together in their collective inaction. The officers finally disappeared with Clara down a narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet terminal. The crowd remained still for a moment. The air felt thick with unresolved tension. Daniel stood there, his camera still recording, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he couldn't just stop filming. Clara's voice needed to be heard. Her story needed to be told. But as the minutes passed and the crowd began to disperse, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something deep inside him had shifted. The injustice he had just witnessed wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something much bigger. And now, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had to do more than just record. He had to be a part of the change. But for now, all he could do was film. And in that moment, as the footage captured Clara's unjust treatment, Daniel realized something. This wasn't just about her. This was about all of them. Every single person in that terminal who had turned away. This was about the fear of speaking out, the fear of confrontation, the fear of doing what was right. And as the footage continued to roll, Daniel's resolve hardened. He knew this was only the beginning. The moment he captured would spark a chain of events that no one could ignore. The video of Clara's arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere, on social media, in the news, and across the internet. Millions of people saw the injustice unfold before their eyes. Clara, a black woman, treated like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. The footage was raw and unfiltered, capturing the cold, calculated brutality of the police officers and the disturbing passivity of the crowd that had witnessed it all but remained silent. The public was outraged. The hashtag Justice for Clara trended globally, and the demands for accountability grew louder with each passing minute. People across the world were appalled by the blatant racism and abuse of power displayed at that airport. Protests erupted in several cities, with citizens rallying for justice, demanding that the officers involved face consequences for their actions. Clara's name became a symbol of resilience, of a fight against systemic oppression, and of the urgent need for change. But Clara herself remained unshaken by the viral storm. She did not take to the media to seek sympathy or validation. She didn't engage in the endless cycle of apologies from the police, as if their hollow words could undo what had happened. Clara knew better than to accept the late, meaningless apologies offered by those who had wronged her. The apologies were nothing more than a desperate attempt to cover their tracks, to silence the outrage before it could gain any real momentum. Instead, Clara chose action. She demanded accountability, not only for herself but for every person who had ever been wronged in the same way. Clara understood that true justice was not found in empty words. It was found in holding people accountable for their actions, in making sure that those who had the power to destroy lives faced the consequences of their choices. "I don't want their apologies," Clara said, her voice steady as she stood before a group of reporters. "I want them to face justice. I want the system to be held accountable, and I want to make sure no one else ever has to go through what I did." Her words echoed through the halls of the airport and reverberated across the nation. They were simple yet powerful. Clara wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been treated unjustly, for everyone who had been silenced by fear or by the systems in place to keep them down. The video, shot by Daniel Carter, had given Clara a platform. But it wasn't the platform that mattered. It was the message behind it. The video exposed the ugly truth of what had happened, but it also illuminated the need for change. The officers involved, Rohr and Maddox, were now in the spotlight, their actions condemned by millions who had witnessed the injustice. But the attention wouldn't end there. The public outcry pressured local authorities to act. What had started as a viral moment quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Clara's case was handed over to the Justice Department, and within weeks, charges were brought against the officers who had wrongfully detained her. The legal battle that followed was intense, with both officers claiming they had acted within protocol. But Clara had something they didn't have: proof. The video was damning. Every frame was a clear record of their actions. The unjustified handcuffing, the rough handling, the complete disregard for Clara's rights. As the case moved forward, it became evident that there was no way to escape the truth. The public had seen what had happened. They knew what had been done. And Clara, with her quiet strength and unwavering resolve, had made it impossible for the system to ignore it. But the fight wasn't easy. Rohr and Maddox fought back, as did their supporters within the department. They tried to downplay the severity of the situation, claiming Clara had been disruptive or that their actions were justified by a perceived threat. But the evidence spoke for itself. Clara had been calm and composed throughout the ordeal. She had done nothing wrong. The officers had acted based on prejudice, not protocol. Throughout the legal proceedings, Clara never wavered. She sat in court with her head held high, her posture unyielding, even as the defense tried to twist the narrative. But Clara's words, the words she had spoken in the heat of the moment, the words she had shared with the press, remained etched in the minds of everyone who followed the case. "I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for justice," Clara had said, her voice steady, piercing the tension in the room. "This isn't about me. This is about every person who's been treated like they don't matter. Every person who's been judged by their skin color instead of their character." And the world heard her. The people heard her. The system heard her. The trial dragged on, but Clara never lost faith in the fight. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew that the road to justice was long and fraught with obstacles. But she also knew that the truth was stronger than any lie, stronger than any system built on injustice. And with every passing day, Clara's message reached more people, creating a ripple effect of change that could not be undone. Eventually, the verdict came down. Rohr and Maddox were convicted for their roles in the unlawful arrest of Clara Johnson. The court found them guilty of civil rights violations, abuse of power, and false imprisonment. Their actions had cost them their jobs, their reputations, and their freedom. But the real victory was Clara's. Her courage had sparked a movement. Her demand for justice had shown the world that one voice, one determined, unyielding voice, could make all the difference. And as Clara walked out of the courtroom, her head held high, the weight of the injustice that had been done to her began to lift. The world was watching, and now things were going to change. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent as Clara took her place on the witness stand. The room was filled with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Lawyers, judges, reporters, spectators. Everyone's eyes were on Clara, waiting for her to speak. For a moment, Clara's gaze swept over the room, her eyes briefly resting on the officers who had wronged her. Rohr, sitting in his seat, avoided her stare, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Maddox looked down at the table, his jaw tight, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of Clara's calm, unwavering gaze. But Clara didn't let their presence rattle her. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here for the punishment they deserved. She was here for something far greater. The prosecutor called her name, and Clara stood, her movements deliberate, her posture erect. Her confidence was a quiet force, a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions that must have been churning inside her. She had been through so much, but in this moment, she was unshakable. She knew why she was here. This was not just about her. It was about the world watching, about the millions of people who had suffered at the hands of a system that was broken beyond repair. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced for too long. "Clara Johnson," the prosecutor said, his voice almost reverent. "Can you tell the court what happened at the airport?" Clara inhaled deeply, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. But she didn't hesitate. She began speaking in a steady, measured voice, recounting the events with such clarity that every word seemed to slice through the tension in the room. "I was waiting for my flight, just like anyone else," Clara began, her tone calm but firm. "I had a valid first-class ticket. I followed all the rules. And then, out of nowhere, I was accused of something I didn't do. I was treated like a criminal, as though my very presence was a threat." Her words were not dramatic, not filled with rage or anger. There was no outburst, just the stark, undeniable truth. Clara wasn't speaking for sympathy. She wasn't speaking for revenge. She was speaking to show the world how deep the injustice ran, how ingrained it was in the very fabric of the system. "The officers didn't ask questions," Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. "They didn't investigate. They simply acted on assumptions, on biases. And because of that, I was dragged away like I was nothing. I was handcuffed and treated like a criminal in front of hundreds of people. People who just watched. People who did nothing." Clara's voice dropped slightly, but her words cut deeper. "It wasn't just about me. It was about every black person who has been treated this way. It was about every person who has ever been judged by the color of their skin instead of their character." There was a heavy pause in the room, and Clara allowed the silence to settle, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. She wasn't seeking pity or forgiveness or even justice as most would define it. She was speaking to something far more powerful: awareness, change, a societal shift that went beyond individual cases of wrongdoing. Justice shouldn't just be about punishing those who commit wrongs, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. Justice is about making sure that this doesn't happen again. It's about creating a world where no one is treated the way I was that day, where no one has to live in fear of being judged by their skin color, where no one has to be silenced by the system that's supposed to protect them. Her words reverberated through the courtroom, and Clara could feel the weight of the moment settle in. She wasn't here just for herself. She was here for every person who had been wronged, for every voice that had been stifled, for every unjust arrest that had been made in the name of prejudice. The defense attorney, a man whose name Clara didn't even know, rose to object, his voice sharp and accusing. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is straying from the topic at hand. She's making political statements instead of focusing on the facts of the case." But the judge, an older man with tired eyes, waved him off. "Sustained," he said quietly, as if the truth Clara was speaking was something he had heard too many times before. The defense attorney faltered, unsure of how to proceed, while Clara remained calm, her resolve only strengthening. Clara continued, her words now not just a testimony, but a call to arms. "This case, this moment is not about me alone. It's about all of us. It's about the change that has to happen. The system isn't just broken for people like me. It's broken for all of us. And until we hold everyone accountable, those in power, those who perpetuate these systems, nothing will ever change." There was a stirring in the courtroom. It wasn't loud or obvious, but Clara could feel it. The subtle shift, the recognition that she was speaking something profound, something necessary. She wasn't just asking for justice in her case. She was demanding it for the future. How many more people have to suffer before we realize that the system needs to change? Clara asked, her voice now a quiet but forceful declaration. How many more lives need to be ruined by prejudice and hate before we take a stand? The room was still. Clara's words, so simple, so honest, reverberated through the hearts of everyone present. The prosecutor, the defense, even the jury, they were all listening, really listening, for the first time. This wasn't just about an arrest. This was about a truth that had been buried for too long. A truth that Clara had brought to the surface with her courage, her grace, and her unyielding determination. She wasn't here for revenge. She wasn't here for personal gain. She was here to make the world understand, to wake them up to the reality of the system that had allowed this to happen, and to demand that things change. When Clara finished speaking, there was no applause, no cheers, but there was something else, something deeper, something more powerful. There was a shift, a realization, a moment of truth that couldn't be ignored. The room was left silent, but Clara knew that her message had been heard, and no matter what happened next, that truth was out in the world, and nothing could take it back. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the judge delivered his verdict. The case against Clara's accuser, Sarah White, had been quietly building in the background, but now the truth was coming to light. The false accusations that had sparked the entire incident, the ones that led to Clara's wrongful arrest, were about to be addressed. Sarah White sat in the front row of the courtroom, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her once pristine, smug expression had long since faded. She looked smaller now, as though the weight of the truth had slowly begun to crush her. And in that moment, she was no longer the woman who had commanded attention with her wealth and status. She was just another person, someone who had made a grievous mistake, someone whose actions had led to the suffering of an innocent person. Sarah White. The judge began, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving her. Your actions have caused irreparable harm. Your false accusations led directly to the unlawful arrest and humiliation of Clara Johnson, a woman who had done nothing wrong except to exist in a space where you believed she didn't belong. The words were sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on Sarah as the gravity of the situation sank in. She had once been someone who could make a simple accusation and have it believed without question. But now the truth had caught up with her. The world wasn't buying her story anymore. Sarah had tried to distance herself from the blame. She had attempted to justify her actions, claiming that her fears were real, that Clara's presence in first class had somehow made her uncomfortable. But no amount of pleading or reasoning could change the facts. The video footage of Clara's arrest was damning. The witnesses who had come forward, including Daniel Carter, the man who had recorded the incident, painted a picture of a woman wrongfully accused, a woman whose dignity was stripped away for no reason other than her skin color. And now Sarah was facing the consequences. The judge paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before delivering the final blow. Sarah White, you are hereby fined $120,000 for filing a false report, and you will be required to make a public apology to Clara Johnson for the harm you caused. Your actions have not only damaged a life, but have also perpetuated a cycle of injustice that affects people across this country. Sarah's face flushed, her eyes darting around the room, but there was no escape. The consequences were real. There would be no more hiding behind her privilege, no more running from the damage she had caused. But the impact of this trial extended far beyond Sarah's fate. Clara's actions had inspired something much greater. The outrage over her arrest had sparked a nationwide conversation. A conversation about justice, about accountability, about the deep-seated inequalities that still plagued the system. People were starting to ask the hard questions. Why had Clara been arrested in the first place? Why had no one stood up for her? Why had the system so readily believed the accusation of a white woman over the word of a black woman? These were not new questions, but Clara's case had brought them to the forefront of the public consciousness. Her fight had become their fight, and her courage had inspired a tidal wave of reflection and self-examination. In the wake of the verdict, protests erupted in several cities, with people taking to the streets to demand justice not just for Clara, but for all those who had been wronged by a system that allowed such abuse of power to continue unchecked. Social media was flooded with posts and stories, people sharing their own experiences of racial profiling, of being silenced, of being judged by the color of their skin rather than their character. It wasn't just the general public who was questioning the system. Legal experts, journalists, and even lawmakers were beginning to take a closer look at the case and what it revealed about the flaws in law enforcement and the justice system. The case against Sarah White, though it may have seemed like a small victory for Clara, was the catalyst for a much broader movement. It was a crack in the foundation of a system that had long allowed those with power and privilege to act with impunity. And now that crack was widening. In the weeks that followed, calls for police reform and greater accountability in law enforcement grew louder. Clara's story became a rallying cry for activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens who were tired of seeing the same injustices play out over and over again. What had started as a wrongful arrest had turned into something far more powerful. A movement that questioned the very structures that upheld racial inequalities. Clara, in the midst of all the attention, remained as composed as ever. She didn't seek fame, she didn't want to be a martyr. She just wanted justice. But as the world watched, it became clear that Clara had achieved something much larger than she had ever imagined. She had sparked a revolution. One that began with her alone but now included countless others who had been awakened to the realities of systemic oppression. And as Sarah White stood there, facing the consequences of her actions, Clara's message rang louder than ever. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, she had said during her testimony. It's about changing a system that continues to silence and subjugate people of color. We can't stay silent anymore. The world, it seemed, was finally ready to listen. But whether the change Clara had inspired would be enough to dismantle the structures of power that had allowed this injustice to occur in the first place was still uncertain. One thing, however, was clear. The battle for justice had only just begun, and Clara Johnson had become the face of that fight. In the end, the consequences for Sarah White weren't just about a fine or a public apology. They were about exposing the cracks in the system, forcing people to see the ugly truths they had ignored for so long. And as the world looked on, Clara's strength had given them all the courage to stand up and say, "Enough." The story of Clara Johnson didn't end in that courtroom, nor did it end with the conviction of the officers who wronged her. What began as a single moment of injustice had grown into something much more powerful, a movement for change that reverberated far beyond the walls of the airport. Clara's unwavering courage had sparked a fire, one that burned brightly in the hearts of people all around the world. It was a fire fueled by a deep desire for justice, for equality, and for accountability. When Clara stood on that witness stand, demanding not just justice for herself but for everyone who had ever been marginalized, she unknowingly became the beacon of a movement that would forever change the course of history. But it wasn't just Clara's words that made an impact. It was the way she lived those words. She showed the world that it was possible to stand up to injustice without resorting to anger, without becoming consumed by hate. She demonstrated the power of calm resilience, the strength in keeping one's dignity intact, even in the face of the most humiliating and dehumanizing circumstances. Her example was a powerful reminder that true change comes not from a single act of defiance, but from the steady, unyielding determination to keep fighting, to keep pushing for what's right. As Clara's story continued to spread, it ignited something in others. People from all walks of life began to find their voices. They began to speak up in their own communities, in their workplaces, in their schools. They realized that they didn't have to stay silent anymore. Clara had shown them that their voices mattered, that they could stand up for themselves and others without fear. A new generation, one that had been watching from the sidelines for too long, was now taking action. Young activists, students, and professionals, inspired by Clara's courage, began to form groups, hold rallies, and push for systemic change. Social media platforms, which had once been used to scroll mindlessly through cat videos and selfies, were now being used to share stories of injustice, to amplify marginalized voices, and to organize movements that spanned across borders. But what was most powerful about this movement was its inclusivity. It wasn't just about Black lives or women's rights or LGBTQ+ issues. It was about all of us coming together to fight against the systems of oppression that had been built over centuries. It was a movement that transcended race, gender, and nationality. It was about standing in solidarity with one another, knowing that when one person's rights are violated, the rights of everyone are at risk. The lessons Clara taught us were not just about standing up to authority or demanding accountability. They were about the importance of empathy, of listening to the stories of others, and understanding that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The lessons were about the need to dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality and to build something better, something more just, something that gives every person, regardless of their background, the opportunity to thrive. But even as the movement gained momentum, it was clear that the work was far from over. True change takes time, and it requires a sustained effort. It requires all of us, every single one of us, to keep pushing, to keep fighting, and to keep holding those in power accountable. And while Clara's case was a victory, it was just one battle in a much larger war for equality and justice. The fight was not over. So, what can we do to keep this momentum going? It starts with us. It starts with each of us taking a stand in our own lives. It starts with speaking out when we see injustice, with standing in solidarity with those who are oppressed, and with using our platforms to spread awareness and amplify the voices of those who have been silenced for far too long. We must be the change we want to see in the world. And if you're looking for more ways to stay engaged, to continue learning, and to be a part of the movement for change, then I invite you to join us. Subscribe to this channel and stay up to date with the latest stories, discussions, and resources that can help us all become better allies, better activists, and better human beings. We are in this together, and together we can make a difference. Clara Johnson's story is just one example of how a single act of courage can spark a global movement. But it's up to us to carry that torch, to keep fighting, and to make sure that no one ever has to experience what Clara did ever again. The world is watching, and the time for change is now. Will you stand with us? Will you take that first step toward a more just and equal world? The choice is ours. Together, we can create a future where everyone's voice is heard, where every person is treated with dignity and respect, and where justice is truly served for all.